IVM.
Hi, everybody. On behalf of the team at IVM Podcast, I have a request for you. We'd really appreciate it if you could go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and fill out our survey over there. It's going to take a few minutes to do, but it gives us some really interesting information that we can take to advertisers and brands about who's listening to the network. If you're comfortable giving us your email address, while you're filling out the survey, we'll enter you into a random drawing where we'll be sending out a bunch of IVM swag to some of our listeners. Last year we sent out coffee mugs, and this year we're hoping to send out much cooler stuff. That's ivmpodcast.com/survey. We really appreciate your help.
Paperboat launched a product line which was about nostalgia at the center of it, because they talked about drinks and memories. When they talked about a product proposition that was like, hey, it's aam panna like your mother made it. So let me take you through a journey of taste to a journey of memories. And therefore, their baseline of drinks and memories lived up to that. It says that you either have a soft drink, which organoleptically takes you back into a different time, or you have a drink that takes you back into a certain knowing feeling kind of a zone. And they built a product around it, and they built communication around it.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast. My guest today is a Tamilian brought up in Delhi. He's confused between dosa and samosa all the time. He's an artist, meme maker, a life coach, and also an adman. But the version of Hari that I really love is the commentator of popular culture, human condition, and storytelling itself. He also operates, and many of you might know him by this name, by the pseudonym Flashback Gordon. He defines himself more as a nostalgist and a curator of useless memories. Welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast, Hari.
Thanks, Karthik. Lovely to be here.
I think that last part of being a nostalgist and a teller of what for you is useless memories is really, I think, what the episode today is going to be about. You have always spent a lot of your time in Delhi, isn't it?
Oh, yes. All my life in one city called Delhi.
And that really shows up. I mean, for those of us who follow you on social media, I think more than anything else, 2-3 things really we look forward to in every piece of content that you put out. One is the Delhi of yore, which obviously was a much, much more beautiful place to be and to spend time in. And also the different pop culture symbols, of our time, right? From Amar Chitrakatha to everything else. So we will get to that in a bit. But what do these memories mean to you? Let's start there.
Yeah, Karthik, actually it's a very rich subject, and I actually relate to it because there has been a constant transition of the environment that I have lived and grown up in. Usually, a lot of people say that if you stay anchored in a place too long, a city too long, or a country too long, and you don't travel much, you tend to kind of become very insular, and you tend to know very little about the world, simply because travel adds a lot more to you, or having lived in different places adds a lot to your cultural understanding, etc. While I'm not defending my lack of, or I'm not kind of defending my position of being in a single location for a very long time, I feel that as a city, Delhi has kind of itself changed so many times that one has felt the transition of cultures. One has always felt that it is not the same city that it used to be every decade. So really, and that gives me a huge repository of memories, of experiences, of different capsules of time that I have traversed through and traversed along with several other people whom I relate to very well. I also find that this whole collective memory and individual memory, all this gives me an exceptional ability to connect with people of the same generation, of the same time period, people who kind of recall the similar elements. And therefore, the sheer number of new friends and connections that I've made in the recent past using those markers of nostalgia, or using those markers of memories of Delhi is just humongous. And they live not here, but in various parts of the world. And therefore, it's to me is something that is it's very dear to me. It's very interesting to me, and I like being in this space. So, if that answers the question, it's a pretty long one answer, but I've tried to kind of cover almost all parts of it.
No, it answers this beautifully. In fact, I think two things stand out from what you just said. Right, one is the way you sort of relate to someone new. Someone new looks at the content you're creating, and then there is an immediate connect. And that connect seems to sort of, especially if it is nostalgic, it sort of seems to bring down the entry barrier, what we refer to as an icebreaker significantly, right? Now, suddenly, I'm not just connecting with you on this content, I'm connecting with you from a period of time, right? So that becomes easier for us to relate to, isn't it? Is that very unique to nostalgia?
I think, it's actually a very important part of what sociologists refer to as this whole subject of nostalgia. See, to a lot of us, nostalgia is a very fun thing. It's a useless thing. It's an unproductive thing. Especially, if you've been brought up in a fairly moderate household where there is always a greater value placed on progression rather than regression or getting attached to memories, because there has always been a value placed to, hey, get away from the past and move into the future. That's what is this whole narrative all about. And therefore, getting stuck to the past is almost very like a dogmatic thing. It's like saying it's not a good thing to get stuck to the past. But actually, if you look at it, the past is pretty much part of the present, because it is what past you retain is you've already filtered out that is unproductive, and you've kept what is productive, and where you feel that some of the best moments of that have taught you have kind of been retained with you. Now, when you kind of see that as a collective, you see that people kind of respond to you much better. It is an icebreaker. It's a very big icebreaker, because in today's connected world, there are so many belonging systems that we kind of subscribe to. For instance, I'm just giving you an example. I'm not exactly that, but I could identify myself as part of a religion, as part of a sect within a religion. I could identify myself as a part of a city dweller. I could identify myself as part of a person that I speak a language. And therefore, each time we selectively choose a certain belonging system to connect with somebody. Now, what nostalgia does is it kind of gives you a platform to connect with people where you remove a lot of obstructions. Because every time you kind of say that, hey, I am a Delhi person, I grew up in Delhi, there is a chance that you may not connect with a person who's grown up in Bombay, because of many polar opposite kind of viewpoints of thinking. The same with religion, the same with sect, etc. However, nostalgia as a platform is so endearing. It doesn't matter. It kind of cancels out the other belonging system subscriptions. And it just tells you, hey, I like Snowy. You see the painting at my back. And you like Tintin and Snowy. And that's all that matters. And therefore, if you look at it, I find it a very easy way to connect with people of a certain generation, taking away their other political viewpoints, their other philosophical viewpoints, and simply connect on certain things and certain markers that are largely positive. Because you willy-nilly retained only positive things from the past, and kind of filtered out. At least in public, you don't want to identify with all the negatives or the detractors. So yes, it is something that provides a universal platform. It kind of filters away and kind of cancels the other checkboxes of the belonging systems, and it just allows you to start connecting on stories that everyone relates to. Okay, so typically, let me give you an example. And I think social media to people like us is a great boon, because if you look at simply, I'm a Tintin enthusiast. Okay, so now
Right.
Tintin comics also are not as widespread, because in popular culture it's a very niche thing, really, because Tintin was never popular in
It's also expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be very expensive. It is still very expensive. And we used to largely buy back issues. But if you look at it, Tintin culture was not very prevalent in the United States. Even Spielberg had a lot of trouble understanding the concept of Tintin. But mostly Europeans, Belgians, French, and a lot of English people and Indians, because Tintin made its landing in India through a Bangla publication. I think it was Ananda Bazar Patrika, and therefore Bengalis, largely people in Delhi, Bombay, South Indians, and Belgians and French relate to Tintin in a very massive way.
Tintin is also a very, very legit Bong nickname, no?
Yeah, I think they have actually borrowed it.
I don't know if it has anything to do with
Yeah,
it.
it is. I guess it is, because, of course, bomb nicknames have some crazy origins, and I have reason to believe that Tintin largely came from the Hergé Tintin, so suddenly you see Tintin groups which have Belgians, which have Germans, which have French, and which have Bengalis and South Indians. So it's a crazy mix, and therefore what I'm trying to tell you is that in those kind of platforms you don't discuss your political affiliations or your philosophical subscriptions. You only talk about that subject, and I find that very enriching, because it saves a lot of time. It's very specific to what you kind of want to talk about. You don't have to warm up to the other person, because these interests are very, very specific. So I find nostalgia as a platform remarkable for creating very, very positive and productive and enriching relationships.
Now, there's this point about positivity that you made multiple times, right? I think it's very significant, isn't it? I, for one, always thought that a lot of violence, a lot of anger, a lot of grief that we feel towards each other, not just in the same city, across communities, across religious sects, across countries as well, is largely because of unfamiliarity. I don't know this person, so hence my first reaction to that person is something that involves fear. Right? It could be an irate neighbor. It could be someone who's trying to cause harm to me. It could be multiple different things. And I think what nostalgia does is you mentioned multiple things about a person's facet. Even if it is one or two things, it brings that degree of familiarity, saying that, okay, this person likes this and he's from that point in time, so I should be able to relate to him. He can't be that bad. Sort of a bridge is, I feel, what this builds, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, for example, people who might not share the same mother tongue as you might only share the facet of reminiscing about Delhi with you, and might not share some of the other things, right, like advertising, etc. But they still will have a connection with you.
Yes, absolutely. And I must give you a couple of examples here. There is a very large group on Facebook called that 70s and 80s kids. And the moderators do a fantastic job of keeping the page sans any political conversation. And at any point of time, if you are connected on that, the subjects largely kind of quickly give you a telegraphic understanding of, hey, this guy has been where I've been before, even if I don't know him. That familiarity, that that Bahadur's orange kurta and Bela's green kurta, you grew up with that. You knew a lot of it was tacky, and the fact that you've kind of absorbed that as much already gives you it kind of qualifies for a certain familiarity. That, yeah, hey, you're feeling what I'm feeling. And a lot of things, lot of shared nostalgic markers such as that is kind of quickly and gives you the biodata of a certain person. Saying if a person is saying, hey, I read Indrajal comics, you've already in your mind made up 3 or 4 things about him, saying if he read Indrajal comics and therefore he must also like this. So it's a bit like how the digital algorithm works today. That when you buy something on Amazon, they'll say, "Hey, people like you also bought." It's actually a very it's a coding for because nostalgic interests are very specific. Because to me, at least the period we came from, a certain generational understanding of what something means in relation to something else is always a very is always a good qualifier of, hey, I know this guy well. So like you said, Tintin was also expensive. Yes, majority of people of our age group know this fact that Tintin was expensive. Therefore, it is not a unique feeling that you have. It's like a common thing that we have. So I instantly said, hey, this guy belongs to my generation. I feel a bit more comfortable with him. And therefore, the context is that of a little more eased kind of approach. I put down my guard. I'm not specifically eager to say that my opinion is better than yours, which usually happens in other contexts. Whereas I quickly figure out that, hey, my political affiliation or thinking is different from yours, so therefore I should raise my guard. I should say everything that I can be more right than you or more correct than you. So, all that makes for very, very, it kind of lays the foundation for a more negative interaction than positive and productive ones.
Yeah.
So, which is why I feel that a lot of nostalgic markers, especially the generation we grew up in, had some very innocent interpretations. If you look at the Tintin comics, for instance, they are all very clear line, no shades of gray, absolutely simplistic kind of movements. And therefore, you didn't have to kapow your mind to say that, hey, there are shades of gray in it. Whereas graphic novels are a completely different, kind of set of visual language. And therefore, the sheer things that you connect and relate with also bring back that environment of innocence, and you're ready to kind of interact in a more positive and more favorable, pleasant kind of context.
And these connections, Hari, it's almost like a constant craving for humankind, isn't it? We go through a day, whatever we do at work. To me, almost it seems like we're constantly looking for these connections with everybody that we speak to in a given day. Whatever you do for a living, wherever you are in the social strata. And to me, that also makes nostalgia an extremely powerful, I wouldn't say marketing tool, but I would say a tool to propagate a communication, isn't it? Whether you're a government, whether you're a brand, whether you're just someone who wants to be heard. It seems like an extraordinary tool, which one could use if deployed right, to immediately bring in a sense of warmth, isn't it?
Yes, I think you've said a very important thing. It's actually, you hit the nail on the head. It's a tool. It's a tool that marketers are successfully now deploying. Not everyone, because there is a certain cohort that is willing to connect with nostalgia, not just to look at a free meme, but to actually invest a significant amount of money to buy a piece of their childhood or youth that they relate to and they want to cherish very deeply. If you really look at it, what is this need? Let's kind of try to understand it. And I'll tell you my own experience with how I see people relating to it. See, I think the first thing is that the whole concept of nostalgia kicks in adulthood. Slightly, I would say, late adulthood. So there is a need to kind of connect with a certain past, a past that you have retained, which is less complicated, where you feel you were a much better person and a much simpler person in terms of not being so complicated. Because as you journey into adulthood, there are so many more connections you make, whether you like them or not, because you're at work and you're trying to prove yourself constantly. You're always in a battle, and you yearn and long for those moments that you want to go back into, where you were more authentic, a lot more spontaneous. Because ultimately, human beings want to be free and spontaneous all the time. That's what drives them. And anything that takes away from the ability to do that is always seen as a deterrent, is always seen as something that you want to run away from, and it's always seen as something that you have to do and not want to do. And therefore, people kind of keep these little capsules of time in their heads, tucked away in their pockets, so that they can quickly go back to that. It's almost like going back to your mother's lap and spending, a few minutes of solace where you won't be judged, where it's unconditional. And that's what nostalgia is about. Let me go back to that time. Let me recall that time. Let me kind of reconnect with that time that makes me feel like my authentic self. And that is a very big need today, as you know. And a lot of it has come to the fore in 2020 because I don't want to go on and on about it. There has been thesis on 2020 almost by everybody. But this whole concept of return to nature, the fact that we are healing ourselves and nature is healing itself, has got a lot to do with our cutting off from the world that demands a certain way for us to be that we really aren't from the inside. And therefore, this whole concept of sitting in that time machine and quickly transporting yourself back is more relevant than before. It is very real. And the biggest part is time is being invested in it, money is being invested in it. And marketers have realized that. Now, why I say that is that if you look around yourself, there are some brands like Paperboat who are brilliantly kind of leveraging that. Now, Paperboat, and it's something that I've been, I'm an admirer of Paperboat because they launched a product line which was about nostalgia at the center of it, because they talked about drinks and memories. When they talked about a product proposition that was like, hey, it's aam panna like your mother made it. So let me take you through a journey of taste to a journey of memories. And therefore, their baseline of drinks and memories lived up to that. It's just that you either have a soft drink, which organoleptically takes you back into a different time, or you have a drink that takes you back into a certain knowing feeling kind of a zone. And they built a product around it and they built communication around it. In fact, Paperboat's work, of course, we are on a auditory medium right now, but a lot of people would have seen Paperboat's work on the railway journeys of India, which I think is a brilliant and remarkable piece that a lot of people still forward. And they seeded that about 4 or 5 years back. It's still doing the rounds. And that is nostalgic content which Paperboat invested in some time back, is still being kind of circulated, and they're still getting the returns for it. So clearly there is a marketing angle to it, that there is some ROI happening of that content they generated already. Now, that is from a marketing and an impression standpoint. You will understand this from as a media person, that we can always talk about ROI on impressions, but what about ROI, or what about conversion to sales? Now, there I bring the wonderful and the brilliant example of Karma, the radio set that Saregama launched. And I think it's one of the most brilliant case studies of nostalgia marketing, which should go, I'm sure, go into Harvard and as a case history, because you had an inventory of songs that was useless to the world. Because if you look at media today, they only largely play promoted songs. It's the game. But here it is sitting on an inventory of HMV of the last 100 years, and you've kind of beautifully cut it in various verticals and packaged it. And then you said there is an audience for it who is not getting to listen to these songs on radio and TV. There is no Chitrar anymore. There is a Vivid Bharati, but if you log on to Vivid Bharati, I'm not talking FM, I'm talking AM on radio. Yeah. You will hear what you hear on FM today, because that's what people are listening to. And therefore, the brand figured out a market that, yes, there is a paying market, someone who's going to dole out 6,000 rupees for a radio set, which is offline in nature, in which we are storing songs that are largely redundant and useless for us. And they fixed it. And at a form level, so at a content level, they got the nostalgia right. At a form level, again, they worked on it. And they said, hey, let it look like a radio set. Let it not look like a modern fancy gadget. And therefore came one nice looking, yes, contemporary yet classic kind of look. I think it's a remarkable case study. And I'm proud of people who did. I envy them who did that work, which is that's ultimately, then they said, here is something that a useless thing like nostalgia are ready to pay for it. And that is the true test of whether a phenomena is powerful or not. So to me, both paperboard
Yeah.
and of course there are many examples we'll talk about, is that when people are ready to pay for a certain phenomena or a certain thing that they relate to, is when that concept is powerful. And I think I'm on my second Carvana set today after 3 years. I exchanged my old one for a new one because they've done some product upgrades. They made it more online, etc. And that tells you the ability for marketers to kind of juice a concept like this.
No, I think the Carvana case study, and I was recently speaking to Mr. Vikram Mehra, who heads that
Wow.
organization. I had asked him to talk about that story in one of our events. I think for me that moment was the Indian equivalent of the iPod launch or the Walkman introduction for Sony, right? I think it also solved a very real problem. I love the way you described it, both as a form factor as well as what is inside. But it also solved a real problem. Right? Before Carvana, I used to curate these playlists for my dad on any device he was listening to. I used to cut CDs before, and then I used to curate a playlist which he will download onto his MP3 playing device and all of that. And that was a very complex process, right? And I recently clicked an image of my dad cutting vegetables. Though he grew up mostly in Tamil Nadu, he's a huge fan of Rafi and has his music. There's an image of him cutting vegetables and listening to this
Wow.
In the early morning thing. And for me, that was a very powerful image. And I think we also went through a phase where a majority of children of a certain age gifted their parents Carvana. Right? I think it went on for a few years, I feel.
I think a lot.
And we paid a premium for it, right? It's not a normal price. And what you said about the ability to pay for it, we paid a premium for the
product. You paid a premium because Chinese players which looked like radio sets are available. Where they made a difference was put in their software. And that's what you really paid for, actually, if you look at it. If you deconstruct the pricing. And yes, a lot of it was gifting. Yeah. A lot of it was gifting. I particularly, I've suddenly imagined your Tamram father cutting vegetables. Why is it such a Tamram thing when cutting vegetables? It's a lovely image, right? and
I don't think it is, but yeah, we remember it that way.
No, but Rafi is a big thing in the South. Like, I have a cousin who's now in his 60s, and he's part of a very active Rafi club in Bangalore. They just meet up every weekend and sing Rafi songs. It's amazing that how people who didn't even understand the language used to pick up the songs and retain those songs, and because the songs also had a very melodic quotient to them, so they were amazing. So, but coming back
that by itself is worth a conversation someday. Huh? Like most of Chennai, Rafi will score much higher than Kishore. He was a bigger superstar. I don't know. The music directors were the same. The lyricists were the same. The kind of films were the same. But somehow I think the South fell in love more with Rafi.
Yeah, there's a reason for that, I guess, and it's a plausible reason, which is that, at a point in time, especially in the 50s, the South producers were also making Tamil, the Hindi films. So before the Bengalis took over Bollywood, and Kishore was largely a phenomena that happened after people like Shakti Samanta and Shomu Mukherjee, all those people came to create Bollywood content. But Rafi was the time when Gemini Ganeshan films the same stories used to get transferred onto Hindi. And largely the tunes were also same,
That's true.
Like, my mother talks to me about her child in Madurai, and the Madurai college my mamas used to go to those colleges, and my mom said, used to say that, they sang Rafi songs as if they understood the words. They were perfect in their diction and delivery, but they didn't know a single thing about what it meant.
Yeah.
So it was largely, I think a lot of content was pushed also at that point in time for it to get popular.
Yeah. But, something else you mentioned, Hari, and I'm going to go back to something you mentioned in your first answer, which is when you spoke about Delhi, you spoke about how it has changed over many different decades. And it is now a new version of it. And many things you said it very beautifully about Delhi, is also how everybody might remember their own city as well, right? Why I didn't grow up in Bangalore. I remember Bangalore across many different decades, right? And similarly, someone from Nagpur would remember Nagpur changing across time. This sort of a thing, is it actually much more universal than you think? And this is the point where I wanted to also bring in something you had mentioned in one of the conversations we had earlier, which is the concept of a reminiscence bump, right? Is it unique to a certain age that human beings go in, or is it something that we always had?
Yeah, I think interesting, because I came upon this concept about 18, 19 years back in a magazine called Psychology Today. And of course, it's a lot of scientific research has been done around the reminiscence bump, and this is essentially something that is seen across all adults, which is that they tend to retain certain aspects of their autobiographical memory between a certain age, largely between 10 to 30 years of age. And that is what is more pronounced, and that is what they carry after that. Which means that typically today, argument's sake, if you're 45 years old, the inventory or the repository of memories that you will largely keep are those between 15 to 25, all the songs that you remember, all the movies that you remember and got influenced by. And anything you saw after 30 years of age, you don't retain it as much. Like I don't feel the need to retain movies that I've seen after, say, 1997 or say 2000s. None of them stick with me. But a lot of movies that I've seen in the 80s or the early 90s really stick with me. So it's the reminiscence bump, is that curve that when you plot as to, in your age being on one axis, what are the retained memories? And it really bumps between that age, between the age of, I think, largely 18 to 25. And towards 25, it's much lesser. But all those things that you retain for the rest of your life. Okay, this might sound very simplistic, but it's actually a very interesting and a very intricate concept. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, everything that is now we have to understand this a little more clearly. Now, the thing is, when I've retained all of that, that becomes my benchmark for what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. That becomes my benchmark for what is great quality and what is bad quality. It's like nothing like the good old times phenomena. So even I must admit that in terms of melody, Bollywood has kind of done remarkably well, especially post 2000s, where you have brilliant music directors on the scene. I would also say even people who copied tunes did it beautifully, because designing a certain song takes a lot of effort. And therefore, what happens is that your radar to kind of come, but I've always been very unkind to say Bollywood music after the millennium, unless it's exceptionally beautiful. So what happens is you always tend to compare things with what you have kept in your bump. Okay, that's fantastic stuff in your bump, and nothing kind of comes close to it. Now, that bump is there for every generation. So it's like, and at any point in time, there is a society in which the reminiscence bumps are dominant, and culture plays to that. So let me explain this to you. Today, for an age group of, say, 45 plus, the reminiscence bump has different elements, and therefore the implications for marketing has different elements. So typically, a Karma is being marketed to all the 40 plus people whose reminiscence bump is that has retained Vivid Bharati songs, that has retained Chitrahar, that has retained a certain time of their lives, right? But if you look at a product like Nokia 3310, which was actually launched in, I think, around 99 or 2000, 1999 or 2000, at which time the current 45-year-olds have already kind of passed their reminiscence bump stage. So you need to understand who that is being marketed to. It's being marketed to the millennials who would have been children at that point of time, or early adults at that point of time. So at any point of time, the marketability of certain nostalgia products also is dependent on the understanding of where the dominant generation's reminiscence bump is peaking. Of course, now today, if I go to a 60-year-old and try to sell him a Vespa for a couple of lakh, or say a Java, a motorcycle for a lakh and 50,000 rupees, he'll pick it up because he's ridden a Java back in the 70s. So the value that you're ready to pay also, the marketing is also very smart at, with that. And really, that is really the combination of all those elements you spoke about: cities, how they've evolved, how people put themselves and visualize themselves in their memory, saying, hey, I used to be like this, so I'm going to be like this again. And this city used to be like this, and I want to bring back this aspect of the city, and all of that. So that's the crux of this reminiscence bump. And this is a very interesting concept because today, sometimes I don't relate to a lot of memes. I don't know if you've seen some of these memes which glorify Andaz Apna Apna, for instance. Andaz Apna Apna has now become a classic legend.
Yeah.
That is because I don't consider it a classic legend, because I was already, I had passed my reminiscence bump stage at that time. But it is a classic legend for all those kids who are 10 years younger than me. And they are salivating on it as if I like the way I salivate on Tintin, and certain things. So I think that is the concept which one needs to, every person who's understanding the subject of nostalgia needs to understand this whole concept of reminiscence bump. It's a good measure. It's also, and nowadays you have all the information there. So if you want to kind of calculate the reminiscence bump for the next generation, for the Gen Z, we can actually sit down and do this today as to what will peak as a marketable concept for them when they turn 20,
right,
22.
Yeah, I would imagine that the Caravan in 10 years from now would be the first form factor of an iPod, right? Something like that. But if you look at the technical definition of reminiscence bump, it says that it is a tendency for older adults, people typically over 40, to have increased or enhanced recollection for the events that occurred. And like you said, at a certain point between when they are 18 and 30. But what I really find fascinating in this is this enhancement sometimes is also very newfound, right? Like, for example, when I was a child, I found train travel to be extremely hectic. You take an auto, you go to the railway station, and you sort of get into a crowded platform. You're running, carrying all the bags with your family. Then again, and when you're in, you're constantly sleeping or reading a comic and everything else, right? But today, when I look back, I see it more romantic than it probably was for me at that point in time, right? So it's also a bit of a lens change to the whole thing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, man! This is so beautiful that you said. And I must tell you about this thing I saw. It's a very profound thing. It's funny, but it's profound. I saw this recently. It says nostalgia is a dirty liar.
Yeah.
That insists that things were better than they seemed. And also that the fact that nostalgia is a seductive liar. Now, you're absolutely correct. When we were going through that particular point in time that we are so romantically cherishing right now, it was quite undesirable. We didn't really want to be there, but suddenly we have kind of romanticized it. So let's talk about it. It's a very interesting question, and this is where the whole construction of a narrative in the human condition begins. Okay. First of all, let's understand that as human beings, we are constantly constructing a narrative of ourselves, for others and for ourselves, saying, I am like this, I stand out like this, and I will survive like this if my identity is like this. And therefore, a lot of what I've gone through, I also construct, I also renovate, I also refurbish, I also reconstruct. And this ability to reconstruct is a memory or a past is what the art is all about. Today, if you talk to a lot of people about, say, a celebrity like, say, Shah Rukh Khan, he will talk about his life journey. He will romanticize a lot of things that have happened in the past, which were pretty mundane back then, but he will make it look like it's part of a beautiful story that has landed up here. That is what is a measure of success. Saying, hey, I grimed it out at the platform, which is why I'm sitting in a business class today. We are always wanting to say that because we feel a certain sense of achievement in having reached where we are. And therefore, we talk about a past that wasn't as good as what it is today. However, you reconstruct that past, you add a lot of masala to it. Okay, you add a lot of mythology to it. Mythology is all about that. It is a constructed past. Nostalgia is also a constructed past. So when I talk about, you're absolutely correct. When I talk about the Karol Bagh, which used to be like a big Mylapore South Indian hub, I hated it for what it was when I was 12 years old, when I was 13 years old, because it was, one couldn't decide whether you belonged to the world that was outside or whether the world that was inside. It was highly confusing. And for an adolescent, it's a crisis. However, when I look back, I make it look like an R.K. Narayan, Malgudi Day story, because I want to tell myself and the world that it was a beautiful past. And therefore, you construct that. And if you actually go to, in fact, I've tried to make some connections with this and this whole yogic concept of ragam and dvesham. I don't know if you've heard about this. Sukhanushayi ragam and Dukhanushayi dvesham is one of the sutras, which is one of the most authoritative, texts on human condition, which exists in Indian philosophy. And they say that you largely tend to retain and go towards things that were very favorable to you, and you discard and expel and cancel out things that were not favorable to you. And things that were not favorable to you, if you think that they are now working for you, you will put some powder on it and make it look a bit more ragam in nature. So, it's selective. What people do with their nostalgia is also they selectively retain those things that can work for them. Let me put it this way. Today, if you were to kind of say 10 years ago or say 15 years ago when you were in college, you would never have admitted that, hey, your family vacations were only in India and they were on trains, because you were trying to fit into a belonging system where others would have only traveled by flights, for instance, and therefore you didn't want to kind of feel left out. However, when you joined the marketing world and you were compelled to say that I have seen real India and I've been on platforms, you'll quickly deconstruct the other thing and you'll construct a new mythology around yourself.
Right.
Saying, hey, you know what? I've been with this. I've traveled with a hold all. I've been in second place. So you're constantly, look at it, such an interesting concept. The past keeps changing and past keeps getting modified. And it's not a lie. It's a narrative. We all construct that narrative. And nostalgia is a beautifully constructed narrative that, according to the meme that I told you, is a seductive liar. Is a dirty liar that tells you that things were much better. But the fact is, it's not telling you. You are using nostalgia to make things work for you in the present context.
Yeah.
Whether you're making it work for yourself or whether you're making it work for yourself, for others, or for your own self to internalize some markers of success.
Yeah.
So that's what makes this thing very beautiful.
It is, and I love the way you put it. Extraordinarily fascinating. It is more of a self tool than something that you use to propagate. Hari, that's a wonderful place for us to take a very quick break. When we come back, I want to speak to you about the work that you have been doing personally on social media as well as otherwise. Stay tuned. We'll be right back on the Filter Coffee podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, it's 2021 now. It's time you did. You didn't in 2020. That was bad enough. But now in 2021, you really, really should. It's IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And a quick reminder to everybody, just please help us out with our survey, ivmpodcast.com/survey. We've had a number of you fill it out so far, but we want to shatter last year's number, right? Really, really blow that up. Go fill out the survey over there. If you do, we'll select from the emails that we have got submitted, and we'll be sending out some interesting swag to people. So what should you be listening to this week? First thing I want to talk about is the unprecedented episode. We did a triple crossover. Vineet Kanabar from Storytellers and Storysellers, Varun Dugirala from Advertising is Dead, and Karthik Nagarajan from the Filter Coffee Podcast all got together and put together a mega episode. Do check it out on whichever of their feeds you want. It's available on all three. On Naan Curry, the guy spoke about the history of alcohol in India. It's got a longer history than people would think. Definitely do check it out. Another show I want to call out this week a little bit is The Note by Maruk Inayat. Maruk had 2 fantastic episodes this week. She did her first episode with Amitabh Mattu about the elections in Kashmir, and then she did another one where she told the story of how she faked her identity to interview Benazir Bhutto. Definitely do check it out. And with that, let me get you back to your show.
Welcome back to the Filter Coffee podcast. We're speaking to Hari Krishnan about nostalgia. And what a beautiful first half that was, Hari. I really loved the way you sort of put it. And, to me, I've also been thinking that nostalgia is a very common thing for all of us. And we all process it in a rather personal way, by way of keeping stuff in our shoebox, so to say, right? But you personally have been able to harness it, not just to a point where you can express yourself through that, but also made it almost into an art form, right? To you, when did it first become really important to do this?
Look, I think everything is to do with social media, because these things always were there. The ability to or the need or the desire to be reminiscent of certain events in your life. These always came up in conversations with people before social media existed. We were doing these things. We were doing these things in conversations. We were doing these things in parties where we simply wanted to connect with people with shared memories, and we wanted to say something about ourselves because of that we carried a certain taste for things, or we carried a certain repertoire of tastes or likings, and therefore it was always there. But with social media, especially, I would say Facebook and Instagram, because the tools to express became much more than just conversations. There were visuals, and uh, there were words that one could use and connect and expand the circle. And therefore, that's when this whole thing became more pronounced, where I could pick up any point about a shared past and immediately connect with people and get responses to that specific feeling that I had at that point in time. While it is largely popularly thought that social media is for self promotion and all of, which is also fine. It is always absolutely fine. Every human being is at any point of trying to sell himself to himself and to others, saying that, hey, I'm alive, so please, I'm surviving. It's a validation for survival. However, most of these feelings are, I must admit, very spontaneous. When I think of when the winter weather kicks in, I cannot help but feel the warmth of the mother's sweater that was being hand knit by my mother and other neighborhood women. And it brings back memories of those beautiful days when we used to run between household to household exchanging knitting needles, saying my mom wants this knitting needle, etc. So, and when you put it out there, it immediately evoked a common response, and you felt connected in an increasingly isolated world. Then I realized, and I saw that a lot of people were connecting. I was also gifted with another very big thing, which is that my dad used to work in a camera company. And at a time when photography was an unaffordable hobby, of course, now it's just about having a phone and a lot of bytes in your phones and processing power. But at a time when prints used to be expensive, it used to be a tedious process of clicking pictures and taking negatives to studios. Because my dad used to work in company that used to do all of that, we had the privilege of having a lot of free film at home and free processing and stuff like that. It was part of a certain industry. So we just simply collected thousands of pictures that belong to a certain era. So I've got personal archives of about pictures that range from the 50s of my grandmother right down to now. And I find the ones which kind of cut off in the 80s the most beautiful. After that, I don't really like my reminiscence bump really stopped kind of working after that.
Right.
Now, when that happened, that was the second level of content that I could create using nostalgia, and I could connect with people. Because when I was putting up these pictures, I realized I wasn't just putting up my past, I was putting up everybody else's.
Yes.
Because, I still remember, I remember that I picked up a picture from 1978, and it was a picture my father clicked at India Gate. We'd all gone to welcome Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States in those days. And he was visiting India, and it was known to a few circles. There was no social media those days. People, newspapers talked about it. So there were a few hundred people in India Gate waiting to cheer him. And of course, as always, the ruling party had called in a lot of school children, and then outside the school children periphery, there was this public who was standing, and we all got to see him. Now, when I put up that picture on social media, suddenly I found, and I put a hashtag, I found people I didn't even know saying, hey, we were also there. Or, hey, we remember that time. We remember Jimmy Carter. someone called up saying, hey, you know what? There is a village named in Gurgaon after Jimmy Carter. It's called Carterpuri. Do you know that? And we live there. So I know some amazing
I
stuff.
know, yeah.
Yeah. There is Carterpuri, which was like usually when foreign dignitaries visit, the governments put a token name. Like Trump has a village behind after him in Haryana somewhere. So it's just like they take a locality and they put up a board there. So Kartapuri, if you actually Google search Kartapuri, it is there. It's near behind Udyog Vihar. Okay. So
Oh, wow.
yeah. So suddenly I saw. So I said, this is the power of nostalgic content, and I have several. In fact, I have content with me that can outlast me actually, because each picture is a story. I can use and I'm now rehashing that content, and all the people who've now recently become my friends are seeing it for the first time. So I'm operating like a channel for nostalgia to that extent. I don't monetize it, but that's fine. I get paid in many other ways, which I feel very gratifying. Now that was the first. So what social media enabled me to do was to share these digitized pictures. Of course, there was a long time when these pictures weren't digitized. So it used to be a big problem clicking that picture and scanning it and putting it up. Then a friend of mine started a service where he started digitizing old negatives and pictures. About 5-6 years back, I went to him and I got all. So everything is then very, very accessible. It's all on cloud. So if a thought strikes me, if a feeling strikes me of a certain time, I'm just able to go and recall it and then share it. And really, that's when Flashback Gordon as a handle happened. And I said, Flash Gordon, I don't know how many of you have followed science fiction of the 70s and the 60s. And Flashback is really the pun on that. And I started kind of getting a lot of traction there. The second level,
Right.
which as you know, which got, and I'm immensely gratified, one of the best things that has happened to me in 2020 is the fact that Forbes covered my memes that are largely to do with a very popular comic series. I can't name it, but it's a ripoff on Indian mythological comics that all of us have grown up with, most of us have grown up with. And I have a certain contemporary take on them, and then I put it out. I had in fact even opened a page at some point in time. It was very irreverent content. It had a lot of following, and I had to shut it down because I figured out that it was bordering on an offense. And therefore I've now come back to my own private page to do that, where I felt that those memes again have a nostalgic value because people have grown up with a certain imagery of those comic panels and a certain meaning of those comic panels. And when I connect with that audience using those visuals and with contemporary themes, they immediately connect with that as well. So they're able to see the connect and the contradiction. And therefore, that's the second big thing that is kind of working for me. Now, one might argue that, hey, you're doing all this true to your name, you're a curator of useless things. How has it helped you in your life? Besides getting a few soft metrics like likes and hearts, which you seem to be snorting through your nose. I must admit that I've got a lot of work. I've been able to convert that into money. If for critics who think that it is useless, that yes, these narratives say a certain thing about you. It makes you connect with people at positions you can influence with your thoughts. And of course, it's always about your wholesome narrative that you're able to put out in the world that gets you business as well. And therefore, nostalgia to that extent. And it's largely to specifically answer your question, is the last 10 years, in which Flashback Gordon has really kind of worked for me.
Right.
And what I also sometimes do is this whole Star Wars franchise that has been a big thing till last year. I've been able to also successfully juxtapose a lot of old archival family images with Star Wars images, because Star Wars means to me a lot as much as it does to my son, because it's a franchise that's simply so long and it's beautifully curated.
And with the Mandalorian, it will mean a lot to, I'm sure, him more.
Yeah,
well. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
But tell me, how is it doing? Because I have still not, while I've got a Hotstar connection, I've still not got myself to watch it. Have you seen it? Is it good? Is Baby Yoda good? Or I've never got the time also actually to do that.
No, it's great. I think after beyond a point, and this should be a separate episode by itself. But I think every franchise goes through a phase where it is it's sort of flagging a bit, and then something else happens which sort of resurrects it. Right? In a way, you could say that for Benedict Cumberbatch, series on Sherlock, for the Conan Doyle franchise itself, right? I think the Mandalorian is a bit of that for the Star Wars franchise. While the films were okay, I think there was a bit of a disbelief in the Force, so to say, up until a point. I think that's going to come back.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Sherlock Holmes. I must again, I'll very interesting intersection of nostalgia with Sherlock Holmes. Let me explain this to you. I was watching Sherlock, the Benedict Cumberbatch version, and my wife and I are huge Sherlock Holmes fans. And she's never, for some reason, been very keen on watching the modern Sherlock, and she's been kind of following it for the last few weeks. And we've got into discussions about Jeremy Brett. You remember Jeremy Brett, the Sherlock Holmes, whom we grew up with, the classic Sherlock Holmes of the 19th century, which was, I think it was a BBC production or a Granada production. We all grew up with that because it came on Doordarshan. And Jeremy Brett was an exceptional Sherlock Holmes because he captured the idiosyncrasies of that character so beautifully. If you've read the original book of Sherlock Holmes. Now, Benedict Cumberbatch, and my wife's a very, very absorbed, follower of Sherlock Holmes right from the book days. And she says, this guy is actually more than Sherlock Holmes, the book version that Arthur Conan Doyle authored. This guy is a lot like Jeremy Brett. What Jeremy Brett brought to the character of Sherlock Holmes. And there have been other Sherlocks. Even Michael Caine has played Sherlock Holmes, if you don't know. But somewhere we felt that, this man is very, very Jeremy Brett. He's borrowing a lot from Jeremy Brett, Sherlock Holmes, then building his own style. And I think that's a good thing because we love it. Now, so then we went back and looked at Wikipedia. And I kind of saw Benedict Cumberbatch talked about Jeremy Brett as a very big influence because he was a family friend to his parents.
Okay.
And to top that, there is one specific episode that we actually watched only yesterday, coincidentally. It's called The Abominable Bride, where this entire episode is about this mind games that the new Sherlock plays with himself, and he sets himself back in the 19th century as the original Sherlock Holmes, and it looks like the Jeremy Brett series. He looks like Jeremy Brett in that. So watch that. I think it's an amazing mind play. It's a psychological game that plays on people who watch both the series. Because see, when you're playing a book character, you don't really need to refer to a televised character. Here he's completely done that, and it's amazing. So, what you talked about as Mandalorian's elements that bring back certain things in the Force, etc., are amazing plays. They are games that the creators play with our memory. And I find that very fascinating.
Yeah. And again, going back to the commercial viability of it, it also brings in a certain equity without even the audience having seen the first poster or the first frame, right, of the film. Like, for example, for me, that moment in the James Bond series was Casino Royale. The new Casino Royale sort of brought back a very vintage Bond, but at the same time, the action sequences, the new Bond, the real coldness of Daniel Craig,
the rawness of him.
Yeah. So that sort of reset that franchise entirely.
Actually, Bond is another fantastic case study of nostalgia marketing, because you're absolutely correct. Even the Aston Martin that's there in Casino Royale is that classic Aston Martin that was there in the earlier Bonds. It almost looks like that. It's also because the Bond franchise, according to me, got weakened after the Cold War ended, because there could be no one as sinister as the guys from the East Bloc and the Iron Curtain. And somewhere also this whole metrosexual male of Pierce Brosnan also made it soft, made Bond a lot softer. Of course, he also made the franchise a lot stronger. But yeah, Daniel Craig brings back that rawness of that brute force of that is required of a secret agent to get out of situations. You're absolutely correct. It's Casino Royale really brought back that Bond. In fact, he was more fierce and ruthless than even Sean Connery. If you really look at it.
And that's the thing about the franchise, right? Like what the Broccoli family has done is they've reinvented Bond to a certain level over a period of time, where all of us will have our own reminiscent bumps on Bond.
Yes.
Right. Someone who is 30 plus today will recall the 90s Bond, as really the peak. And similarly, I'm sure in a few years, Daniel Craig will be celebrated as the best Bond there ever was, and surely people might not remember.
Like Sean Connery used to be.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. So I think that's an extraordinary example of something that is based on nostalgia, but it is also constantly reinventing itself. So the equity remains the same, isn't it? You spoke about what you're doing with a certain comic strip, and that comic strip is also in a way our own Marvel, our own DC, as far as India was concerned in the 80s, right? And the sort of art that you sort of brought into that, right? And that sort of humor you brought into that, and I think more than anything else you're doing, that sort of almost became the most popular thing from your stable. Like people really look forward to your next edition of that meme piece, right? And then you sort of also took that to the next level with art, right? We are on a video call right now, and I can see the paintings behind you. A lot of that had a lot of comic references, a lot of references to yesteryear Delhi, etc. Right? So, at an individual level, is it safe to say that today you've been able to sort of put a commercial angle to what you were doing more as a passionate hobby as well? You spoke about how you're always, even now, getting compensated through other means, right? Through the leads you're getting for people who consult with you, etc. But is nostalgia also a bit of commerce now for you?
Yes. In fact, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm a bit chuffed actually. I'm delighted with the kind of work that I'm now getting. I will, of course, talk about it in a few. You'll see it on my social media, but I've actually got opportunities to illustrate for books which have a very strong cultural underpinning of a certain time. People have been able to notice my liking for a certain style, and therefore they've reached out and commissioned me for work to kind of bring that style to certain stories that they've written. So yes, it's a big start. Besides, so there are two parts to it. One is that when you live in the world of irreverence, which is largely what my memes are all about, then people connect with you for certain strategic thoughts, saying, "Hey, can you just because you think like this, and because you have a certain point of view, and because you get into the depth of it, can you kind of be with us and guide us?" That's at level one of strategic thinking and advice and consultation. Level two is when they look at a craft that is born out of all of that, whether it is to do with comic art or whether it is to do with photography that turns into collages. They also say that there is a sense of craft that I bring in, for which also I've started getting noticed, and I've started getting the work. And it's a very big thing for me, especially at this stage of life, to kind of being able to reinvent myself with actually nothing but the past. A lot of people say that I want to completely erase my past and create a new future. I'm very happy to say that I'm being able to create a future using my past to a large extent. Like I said, everything is monetizable. It is whether you monetize it through audiences or whether you reach out to audiences and some of them notice you and say, "Hey, we want to get attached with you." So everything doesn't need to be YouTube views, if you know what I mean. You can gain a certain traction, and when you stand for that kind of line of work and line of thinking, you can get very specific kind of work. So I have seen that happening, and I'm glad it's happening, and I hope it continues to happen, and one has to constantly work on it. But yeah, there are takers for it. There is a market for it. There is a large market for it for players like Saregama. There is a small market for it for players like me. And so it is a very rich territory waiting to be. It all depends on our own smartness as to how best we can make it work. Like I said, nostalgia is a constructed mythology that we actively keep working on, so that it can work for us.
Right.
It's not something you can't change. It's not something you can't modify. It's not something you can't manipulate.
And you, as someone who has led large media organizations as well as creative agencies, you will know this better than anybody else, right? And when you speak about this as being something that people will always relate to, besides everything else we spoke about, and I would love to close, with an advertising point of view. But before I get into that, one of the greatest books I ever read was or is The 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And to me, while I have never lived in Latin America, the Macondo that he created in that book is something that I will always remember with a sense of nostalgia, which is a very weird thing, but I'm relating to his nostalgia and not really mine. Right? And he is not talking about it as nostalgia, he's talking about it as a story. Right? Even today, when people read this book after decades, they will always go back to a sense of home. They'll always relate to Macondo with a sense of home that they relate to their own houses and the towns that they grew up in. So to me, I think that's one of the biggest reasons to believe in the commercial viability of this. Right? Though I'm sure he's turning in his grave as I use the word commercial viability in the same sentence as he spoke. So, but moving on to a subject that that's been your vocation for a better part of your career, Hari, in advertising. This has been used beautifully, and it continues to be used very well. You started this topic by speaking about paperboard earlier in the conversation. There's a lot of other examples, isn't it? I wanted to sort of close our conversation with that. What are some of the great examples of good and sort of bad work in this area that comes to your mind?
Well, interesting, because see, a lot of advertising creations, Karthik, as you know, is led by creators who themselves are stuck in a certain period of time. So by and large, and of course, then there is a market that they relate to.
Yeah.
So I think Paperboat stands out as a brilliant example. I also think that, brands like a lot of these food brands do that pretty well. To me, I think one of the biggest successes is also the success of Royal Enfield. That is being able to leverage that to quite an extent. Right?
Yeah.
At a product level and at a communication level. So it's like when you look at specific pieces of work, or people who say that this takes me back and makes my feeling stronger. It's about also products that are built to bring it back for you. For instance, I feel that Nokia's 3310, the phone that was a big rage that opened up the market back in the late 90s, and its comeback last year is a very big case study of advertising and marketing, but largely led by a product. The fact that Java came back, Ideal Java, which is Mahindra product now, which was actually a very good two-stroke competitor. It used to be two-stroke once upon a time to Royal Enfield, and they've brought it back, and they've got their own cult following happening on Java, which is again a very big case study. Some brands like Bajaj have done it beautifully, where they have kept alive Hamara Bajaj, which was our anthem of childhood, of unity, and they have contemporarized it from time to time. I think Bajaj also did this brilliant work a few years back on INS Vikrant's, I wouldn't call it, what would you call it? They kind of decommissioned the INS Vikrant and then used that metal to create, recycled that. So when they obviously sold to all those people who felt INS Vikrant was a big thing, right? And that's a much smaller audience.
Or people who are extremely passionate about our defense forces also, who might not know about INS Vikrant as well, isn't it? Yeah.
That is another cut. So they obviously got a lot of market there. But fundamentally, that memories got triggered off by a larger set who would have said, I remember that this is something that is big. And so there are various examples, but good examples are these. Now the bad examples, I must tell you, are largely unintentional. Because, like I said, a lot of people who are stuck in this advertising business largely tend to recall songs from their reminiscence bump and try to sell it to the millennials, which will mean nothing. So there have been examples of that. I can't name, but largely creative directors in their 40s and 50s, when they went to college, whatever song they listened to, they present it in a new way to younger people, and it means nothing to them. Even so, if it is not remixed, it's even worse because they never heard that song before. So
Yeah.
those are the, according to me, the bad examples. But yeah, it's a, like I said, it's a craft. You don't have to be really true to what really happened in the past. So long as you can package it in a way that works in the present, that is the best example of nostalgia marketing. And that's where craft comes in. It's just
Yeah.
not recalling that and throwing it at people.
And in a way, it's very tricky in a country like India, right? Where the '60s America, largely that narrative, or the '70s America or the '90s America, is a very singular, monolithic pop culture, right? But in India, it's so different.
Yes.
Like for example, like you rightly said, it's I think advertising in India has always been about a certain number of middle-aged people sitting in Bombay and then thinking for the rest of the country. Right. And it often falls flat, right? When you take a wonderful Yahoo song and then try to dub it in Tamil, it just completely loses, its piece. We spoke about a generation of people who are gifting Karwan to their parents. I think another example that comes to mind of a generation of people gifting it to their children is the Fuji Instax, isn't it?
Yeah.
There it is more of a pass forward sort of a nostalgia product, isn't it? And I love the product, the ease with which they've reinvented the digital camera for the millennial audience.
Yeah, it's actually a wonderful nostalgia example, but completely relevant to the new audiences. In fact, the novelty of Fuji Instax. See, look at it this way. There are two things that are happening in that market in the world of photography. Okay, on one end, there is this large scale collection of photographs that's happening. Every time you click a picture on digital camera, it gets stored on the cloud. And that's at one level, which is happening, which is that memories are completely digitized, right? And those memories now will remain forever. Then there are people like us who are taking our materialized memories, which I call photographs, and we are dematerializing them by scanning them and putting them up on cloud, right? And therefore, if you look at it, the need to recall those pictures at any point of time is high, and to experience them is always on the screen because we are always on the screen. Fuji is a counterintuitive thing. I think it's to do with Polaroid, which shut shop several years ago for various reasons because digital was on the rise. But Fuji figured out that, hey, there is a counterpoint to everything. When the world goes behind a big trend of digitization, let us try and go behind the opposite trend and try to make a success of it, which is what I love about Fuji. They brought this whole Polaroid back. They said there could be an audience. It's just like this whole Youngistan thing. We were all obsessed as a country saying we are the largest country with the largest population of young people. So let everybody saying youth, 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 youth. But suddenly, at one point in time, someone said, hey, there is also going to be at some point of time a huge middle-aged population, and let's go behind. So there is a culture, and then there is a counterintuitive part to that, which is, if this is true, then the opposite also must be true. To me, Fuji is a brilliant example of the opposite being potent, which is that if people are all dematerializing their pictures, there must be a market for materialized pictures. And they went behind that. Yeah. And then they converted it into experiences. Like I've seen largely people of my son's age, who's now 18. Till I put a couple of years back, they used to meet in school festivals, click a Fuji Instax, and it also came with pre-stuck glue. So you could quickly convert it to, you could peel the sticker off and then put it on your phone or your fridge. Yeah. There was some strange novelty to that, which we felt when we were collecting cricketers' cards. So I think it's also to do with the human touch and feel, tactile need that, hey, I can, I think to that extent, if Archie's cards comes back today again, they will have a market. Okay, without getting into shitty things like gifts and cakes and all of that. Just greeting cards. But the work that now I'm doing, I'm rediscovering old post boxes. That's my latest thing, and I'm inspired by a hashtag called Surviving Post Boxes of India. I'm actually noticing that post boxes are still spick and span and clean. Somebody comes and cleans them. The timing on postman wanting to clear it is different. I also see if the Indian government is actually releasing new stamps or not. So while there is a huge mailing culture, and the truth is that mails and forwards are the big thing, there is also a truth which lies in the opposite or in the counterintuitive part of it, which is that there might be still some people who are sending letters. So there is this material and dematerialized world which one needs to understand very clearly, and then nostalgia plays a pretty important part out there.
And I'll come to future gazing in a bit, but sometime back, you're talking about appealing to a large middle-aged audience. From that perspective, another campaign that comes to mind is the much talked about, much dissed cred campaign. What's your take on that?
Look, my take on that is I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the commercials, but I don't know if it worked for them. Because again, the fact that a bunch of aging stars are irrelevant is something that I know. Do the young people who have to buy cred know that? Is my question in my head. But yeah, to a certain generation, to see your own stars mocking themselves felt very good to me. And I also feel that stars like Bappi Lahiri Govinda and Anil Kapoor are pretty large-hearted to that extent that they have agreed to act in commercials where they say, "Hey, get off the boat," right. and that's, I think, brilliant to me as an audience. Now, to a person who is now collecting 5 credit cards and wants to unify them on a cred, for instance, I don't have a cred on my mobile phone. Okay, but to younger people, has that advertising worked? Time will tell. So, but my belief is that it perhaps hasn't appealed to them as much. It has created a lot of attention in our generation. I don't know if it has appealed to them. It's something that one needs to wait and watch. To that extent, watch AK versus AK.
I think it is absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I think I love Anil Kapoor even more now because he's just gone whole hog and completely laughed at himself, and there can't be. And his energy is just amazing. In that,
it is, and I think it's, to just close off on the cred campaign, I think it's also probably because of the insight that people of a certain age also have the best of credit histories and hence probably have more credit cards than some of the younger ones.
Oh, yeah.
It could also be an angle to it. But yeah, absolutely loved AK versus AK. I think it's by far one of the most original writing I've seen in a very, very long time. Right? I thought it was a very, very Indian. And talking about very Indian original writing, another thing I really enjoyed was also Scam 92. Which also goes back to your point, many of your points in a very nice way. I thought it was one of the best original Indian contents to come out in quite some time, because it's not the Indian version of anything.
Yeah, it's a very uniquely Indian story, and even the production. If you look at the curation of things, you can't flaw it. It's a pretty flawless production, and that's what makes these things very appealing to me and my son's generation, because he also wants to see a world where there were no cell phones, and that authenticity is as much as possible retained. So you need nostalgia experts really when it comes to researching for production for biopics and various other things, which is a subject in itself, Karthik. And I don't know if you have the time for it today, but yeah, but yes.
No, I think this is already a fairly long episode. But I want to close, Hari, with your predictions, right? Your predictions for what will be the next Fuji Instax, what will be the next car one. I know I have one. I feel probably not in the distant future we might have the comeback of the Maruti 800, for example, right? Which I think a lot of people who are probably in their 20s have also seen in their houses. I would love to see a Nokia 3310 equivalent of a Maruti 800. Right? What's some of your predictions?
I think, I can only tell you what I imagine, Definitely, if there is a Maruti 800 with a battery which is battery powered, there will, because see, there is a very strong contemporary benefit angle to it than being just vintage. It's just like what the Beetle, the new Beetle, which is also now discontinued, did to people. It is a very fairly luxury offering of an iconic thing. So yes, iconic products will keep coming back, but in newer forms and benefits. Where a person who relates to Maruti 800 like you, such as you, will also say that, hey, I have gone out of the SUV thing also. I want to get back to a simpler life, but I want to get back to a more sensible life. So if there is a Maruti 800 with the battery offering, definitely pick it up because it serves you both the vintage as well as a contemporary need. It's not a white elephant that you need to, like, it was like buying a Royal Enfield 20 years ago. At that time, their carburetor hadn't been improved. We struggled with it. We bought a Royal Enfield, but we didn't know how to maintain it. But then they worked on the product to make it contemporary, give it relevance of operation, besides being the vintage memorabilia. So yes, I think very much if car companies are smart enough to figure that out, that's definitely a prediction, which could be worth exploring for people.
Do you have a prediction yourself, or do you have a desire to see something come back?
Look, I have, I am just kind of overwhelmed by the last 1 year's happenings and seeing how that is going to shape the future. And a lot of it, to me, anything that takes you back to a feeling of safety, comfort, and security, and nostalgia is a very important thing to play there, you will see a line of products. You will see a line of products in tourism, because a lot of international tourism is now going to get affected. So domestic tourism, which appeals to your going back home to your grandfather, grandmother kind of packages will come, which will be hugely underpinned on nostalgia. A lot of health and wellness products that improve resistance, which has become very important today, which harks back to your grandmother's recipe for cough and cold, will come back. A lot of things that place virtue on anything from the past will come back in a contemporary relevance of how to tackle today's challenges. But all of that will be packaged with nostalgia, because it is a world where increasingly you're being told, hey, look what happened, because we probably lost connections with our past. We were running too fast. So across product categories, you may see few products, but you will see a lot of communication and marketing appeal based on the beauty and the virtue of the past. And that's so no specific ones, but definitely a lot of narratives around those were the good old days and you need it now more than ever is definitely predicted for the world.
Great. Hari, thank you so much. It has been absolutely fascinating conversation, and wishing you all the luck in your new ventures. Thank you so much for being on the show.
To you too. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it thoroughly, Karthik.
Thank you. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And filter_coffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with postcards from nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website or wherever you get your podcast from.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I'm Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Nankali podcast every Wednesday, सिर्फ IVM Podcast app या वेबसाइट पर या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने पॉडकास्ट सुनते हो.